And we are live, so there are going to be people in the comments already. Just to start, okay, everyone, I know that my camera is blurry. I have absolutely no idea as to why. StreamYard has decided not to like me when I'm interacting with others. So obviously, as you can see, I am not alone on this live stream. I am joined by the fabulous Morgan from AirspeedPrime, the go-to space for all news relating to Avatar, basically here on YouTube. And we are here to talk about Legend of Korra Book 2 and why it's not as bad as everyone says it is. Morgan, thank you for, for coming to speak with me.
No problem. I always like talking about book two, so it's no problem.
Oh, honestly, I'm so glad to see there are other people who like book two. Like I've always kind of been a bit back and forth because I'm one of those people where I'm just like, I feel like I can't say that I like book two because most people hate it. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't have enough evidence and like ability to argue to defend why I like book two. But I'm now more open about it. And it's great to see that your channel is also and you yourself are very open of your support and like of book two as well.
Mm.
But yeah, to everyone watching, we're going to be diving into just various different aspects of book two itself and why we both enjoy these different aspects of Legend of Korra book two. Starting first with Korra's development, and well, there's definitely a lot to say about this. But Morgan, I'll let you go first with anything regarding to Korra's character.
Yeah, I think this is a huge part of why I like book two so much. Is just that it's I think Cora's best book for character development, because her book four arc is very focused on just the recovery. It's a very specific arc. She doesn't necessarily like have an arc as such in book three. It's more of just her reacting to the Red Lotus, and the book one arc is a little bit more subtle. Here, I think you really see her grow into like she's full on the Avatar at the end, and that creates the situation where she's able to be as sort of like strong as she is in book three. From the spiritual development here, Tenzin's advice towards the end of the book to her, and I just think if it comes full circle really well from like rebel spirit to light in the dark. You really see that arc of like her being separated from her mentor and then coming back around to him, and that being the kind of solution at the end of it. So I think it's a major piece for Korra in this book that not a lot of people I think give it the credit that it deserves.
No, I definitely agree. I think there's definitely something about Cora's character in this book that I think is just so interesting. Like so many people bring up the fact that she's like extra bratty in this season. I
Yeah.
think that just kind of does a bit of disservice to it at the same time because like yeah, she's, a bit of a pain, but there's like she's gone through this huge trauma firstly in the first book that we've just seen. And obviously there is a relationship element as well. But there's this whole aspect of the fact that this is the first time that we're seeing her when there's kind of not really anything happening at that point. She's finally had this huge high come down and this like fear that she had of nearly losing everything in book one, to then have that moment of kind of peace, being able to explore the world and kind of get to know a bit more about herself. And she she really doesn't know who she is outside of the Avatar. Her identity is
Mm.
so tied into it. And how book one ended with her getting the Avatar state back and becoming the Avatar again just not long after she lost her abilities. I feel like it just cemented in her mind that she is only a good person if she is the Avatar. And so her identity became so much more tied to it that she became this sort of more, not like obnoxious, but someone who was just so defensive of who she was as the Avatar that anytime someone questioned her ability, she got on the defensive about it because of her identity crisis in this sense. I think it's just a really interesting part of her character that she doesn't know who she is if she isn't the Avatar.
Mm.
And this season I feel explores that a lot, like
Mm.
the fact that she loses her memory of being the Avatar for a period of time, the fact that people are questioning her skill and ability and people aren't trusting her judgment and stuff like that. I think it just kind of shows a really different side to her, but also makes sense because she's also a teenager with huge amounts of power. Like she's
Yeah.
going to make dumb mistakes as well, which I feel people don't recognize at the same time. Um, But I definitely agree that this I definitely think this is the best season for her development in like a single season, because she starts off really bratty, quote unquote, and kind of learns so much more and learns to be someone outside of being the Avatar by the
Mm,
end as well.
mm.
And I really, really appreciate that.
Yeah, and I think like the brattiness comment, I see it a lot. I also feel like it's kind of understandable, like given the way like she's being treated by Tenzin, by her father Tonrock, that she's not really being respected at all as the Avatar, despite what happened in book one. And she's just like she says, she's only being treated like one of Tenzin's kids, basically. Just that her
Mm.
airbending training just is going to continue until a certain point. That Tenzin is trying to be her spiritual teacher when we only learn in episode 9 he's not spiritual. He doesn't
Mm.
have the answers to any of those problems. And Tonrock is of course not particularly helpful on the spiritual side of things because he's borderline almost anti-spiritual because of his backstory with Unalaq. So it's this situation where like she's lied to, she's betrayed effectively by like two of the people closest to her, and Unalaq comes in and the first thing he says to her is he's the he she sorry um when he arrives, he greets her first before his brother, before Tenzin. He's like, Avatar, it's nice to see you again. And he calls her Avatar straight away. And you can
Mm.
see like he's immediately on to like, I can see there's a bit of an issue here. And that's how he gets like in good with Korra, just by giving her the respect that she's not really being given by the others, because he's sort of helping her and allowing her to be the Avatar when the others aren't really.
Mm. No, I can definitely see that. And I think that's the thing that always confuses me about people being like, oh, I can't believe she fell for Unalaq's, manipulation. I'm like, but everything that's led up to that moment of him being able to get her on his side is
Hmm.
why it happens. Because Tenzin and her father have lied to her. They don't trust her. They don't seem to kind of recognize her as the Avatar. They still see her as someone that needs to be sheltered in a sense. Adding the fact that they lied about why she was sheltered as well, as she finds out, and she was kept locked up, not knowing anything about the world for
Hmm.
what was it? It's like 12 years or something like that as well. So they stunted her even further.
Yeah.
Um, and Unlock is giving her the opportunity to go beyond that, be able to learn more about herself as the Avatar, and is showing her the respect that she clearly feels, and as far as we can see hasn't been shown to her by these authority figures that she does look up to, but don't seem to hold her in the same regard as she holds them, which she clearly thinks
Yeah.
they should. She's the Avatar, she's someone that they should show some kind of respect to at the same time. um so I think it makes sense that she is like not like easily manipulated, but that she trusts Unalaq, because
Yeah.
at this point he hasn't given her a reason not to. He's respected her
Yeah.
in a way that the other mentors haven't.
Yeah, and basically none of the other characters in the early episodes have any real reason to be suspicious of Unalaq either, because they don't know he's Red Lotus, his involvement in the kidnapping attempt, which is a part they don't even reveal here. So it's another case of like they come out about like we lied that Aang was the one who said you had to be trained in the compound, and they still don't tell her about the Red Lotus attack, and he just is able to get her on his side. And yeah, it's not until she has doubts when he starts to do like stuff like blockading the south, and that's when the questions begin to come into play. But even that, as they begin to bring up, is like he's in his right to do that because he's a world leader. He is the chief of the south, even though there's issues between the north and the south. So, um, and that gets into stuff like in like peacekeepers and more the politics side of things that Korra
Mm.
really struggles with, of course. Not that I think Raiko is a particularly like amazing character, um, and that like I never really defend him in this book because ultimately he's over the course of the series revealed to not be a particularly strong leader and does just kind of disagree with Korra almost for the sake of it and just only ever does things for publicity basically.
Mm. Yeah, and I think that definitely kind of not teeters. I don't know what word I'm looking for, but her ability with politics as well. I think is like a really interesting element of that. Is that we kind of start to see in this book as well her development of understanding how the world works in different ways. Like she's recognizing kind of where she messed up slightly at the start in regards to like Unlock's situation, but her understanding why it happened, and then her getting involved with it further and understanding more of the politics. And yeah, she is kind of blinded here and there with certain elements, like assuming immediately that the North sabotage, but obviously find out later it's Varric as well. But I feel like it's just a really interesting element of seeing her get involved in these situations that are politically based, and just kind of seeing her interaction with it, because we didn't really see that in the previous one. Like with the Equalist situation, she didn't try to understand where the Equalist movement was coming from, whereas here we kind of see her try to understand both sides, even though she does end up sort of picking a side by the end when she realizes where the North has kind of gone wrong. But at the start, she does try to keep the peace in that sense, of try to see both sides of the situation, which I think shows like this huge development of her character, is that she's not assuming whoever's fighting is who I'm going to be fighting with, or only one person can be right in this situation and that's the person I agree with. She's kind of trying to figure out both sides, and I think it's just a really interesting like visual of her character and how she's changed even briefly in those few weeks between the Equalist situation and the North and South Civil War scenario.
Yeah, and I think any Avatar would have struggled with this situation, because they do play on the idea that like Unalaq is the one initially to tell her you have to be neutral in this, but then when the reveal comes out about him, that is what sort of decides what side she's on, and that he has like illegally gotten the position of leader of the Water Tribe, and she feels that is a thing that justifies her changing sides, which is pretty on point. But it's like it's hard to prove because you were just told that by someone. And you know, we see that even in like the Kyoshi novels. Kyoshi struggles with political situations, and only an Avatar Zito or maybe a Yang Chen is actually talented at political matters, really. So I don't really have much of an issue with like Korra struggling with this stuff, especially when it's Raiko who's the kind of opposition in all of this.
I definitely agree with that. I think the whole thing is that it never made sense to me when people say that she reacts too hot-headedly to different situations, because the things that we do see in this season, where there are moments, mainly in regard to the romantic relationship element, and that I can always kind of half get as to where the frustration does come, especially in regards to Korra's character. But I don't know, there's just something about how she reacts that just feels so realistic to who she is, but also her age. And even in regards to like Aang has been in the past just as kind of explosive and frustrating in regards to romantic relationship elements. For example, with the Ember Island Players episode, we see his disregard for Katara's feelings in that sense as well. So I feel like it's not something new entirely. And to say, like, so many people bring up that her romantic relationship in book 2 is what damaged her arc and her character because of how she acts. I just don't always get it. Yes, she doesn't react in the best way, neither does Mako, admittedly, but she's reflected on it by the end of the season. She's understood where she's went wrong. She knows that she reacted too impulsively in some areas, and it kind of works out well in the end. I think that's something that so many people forget, is that how she starts at the start of book 2 and how she ends in it, she's like a completely different character in that sense. She has grown so much in those moments. And I think it's something that's kind of just ignored a little bit in areas of the people who do critique, predominantly on the further critique side of book 2, is that she does develop really well in book 2 from where she is at the start and where she is at the end.
Yeah, and I'll definitely say, like, for me, my least favorite part of book 2 is the romance kind of subplot with Mako and Korra, and then Mako and Asami. I just think it's like super focused on the drama, and you don't get too much like actual character development out of it. In that, going into book 3, it's all placed on Mako. Like, and the girls come out of it like completely fine. Like they have no real impact on their arcs going forward, but it like completely changes Mako's arc all the way even into like the comics. Like, it only really got resolved in Turf Wars. So that's kind of where that goes. And I don't even mind it that much because I think it is a relatively small plot within the book. It's only like a few scenes and a few episodes. And it's relatively realistic in that by the time you get to the breakup in Peacekeepers episode 5, everything's just kind of going wrong for Korra, and it builds up to her nearly being killed, the Avatar state being at risk, and that's where she gets beginning. That's where beginnings happens. I like that as this low moment of just everything is wrong, and she has to come back from like absolute rock bottom because of everything that's happened with like her mentors, Unalaq, and romantically as well. But I do think the Mako Asami thing, especially, was like one of the weirdest decisions they've ever made in the show, I think.
Yeah, that part I can agree with. I remember seeing, I think it's, what was it, in the Remembrances episode in book 4, where they're discussing that scene, and the whole kind of slightly roasting Marco situation with the like the little, I think they're like
Yeah.
little reaction things with like Prince Wu and all that sort of stuff. I do like how they kind of commentate on that and be like, oh, you're broken up, it's fine, but still, you know, a little bit okay. And his grandma kind of being like, Marco, you're just like your grandfather, so cheeky and naughty and stuff like that. So I do like how they kind of poke fun of it. But yeah, no, I agree. That part definitely threw me when I remember watching. It's like, okay, sure. That's, yeah, fine. And then everything that follows after as well. I think it does improve it, mainly on like Korra's part, like what we were saying. I feel like Marco does kind of fall behind in that regard in terms of his character. But I agree. I don't think like people seem to make it sound like that was like the main focus of book 2 was like furthering the love triangle. But
Yeah.
really, like you said, it's only a couple of scenes here and there. It's not main plot. It's like the third background plot, because you've got the Unalaq situation with Vaatu, you've got the civil war, and then you've got the romance situation. So it's not even like in the main plot line.
Yeah. It's the same in book 1 as well. It's like one episode focuses on it, and then it's like a handful of scenes.
Yeah. I think that's the whole thing. People seem to think that the love triangle is like integral to the show, but it's just kind of there. It's not really that big of a thing. But ironically, it does also add to Korra's development in that sense of like she understands by the end, yeah, we aren't right for each other in terms of her and Mako. And it sorts itself out by the end. Yeah, he's awkward in book 3, but they don't hold any resentment or any kind like that, which I think shows her growth in that sense as well, because she is someone definitely holds a grudge, but she learns to kind of not do that by the end and beyond as well, which I can really appreciate. But in terms of kind of like other character arcs as well, and from our mentioning of like the different mentors and stuff, I know that Tenzin and a few others as well, such as like Jinora, have their own arcs within this season, which were really, really cool and really interesting. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on Tenzin and the others as well.
Yeah, like I suppose in this case it's like Korra's mentors. It's like mainly like Tenzin, and then Tonraq has a little bit of a kind of mini arc. Tenzin, I really like the arc because you get that moment at the end of episode 1, and Korra decides to go with Unalaq, and it's a little bit harsh the way she sort of dismisses and pushes Tenzin to the side, but ultimately it's one of those things where, in reflection, this kind of needed to happen for both of them to develop, and then when they come back together, to be stronger, because Tenzin had a lot of growth to go through as well. Like he had the arc in book 1 of like just trying to teach her like the kids, but she needed the pro bending aspect to fully get airbending. And it's the same here, where he comes in and is just like criticizing her for like, why did you use the Avatar state to win a race? And it's like, does it really matter? Like it's a very minor point that he's like freaking out about, like you're disrespecting the Avatar state. And it's like, not really. And you can see where like there is an issue here between the two of them. Like she's not being kind of treated in the way she expects to, and Unalaq is treating her that way. But Unalaq shows her that, hey, I have this technique. Look what I can do with spirits. Tenzin can't do that. And like I said earlier, like he's not spiritual, and he has to come to even accept that Jinora is actually the one who is spiritual, and begin to see her kind of growing up. And that continues into book 3 and the whole Jinora getting tattoos plot. But the big thing is like he has his arc with like his own siblings, his own children and like spends more time with them. They address some of their own issues, and it eventually comes around. Like in the Bog of Lost Souls, he has that moment with Aang, and I think it's really good. It's the, you know, I am Tenzin moment, that don't try to be me, you are yourself. You know, it's fine for you to want to kind of live up to what you kind of want to be, but do it in your own way. And that advice is effectively, he alters it a little bit, it was the same general idea of the advice that he gives to Korra, and he actually becomes the mentor she needs, which is more of a, you know, just personal figure in her life. And that continues their arc into like book 3 and 4, where they're more peers. And especially like in book 4, they're very much equals. They're both sort of world leaders effectively at the end, and there's no sense that like Tenzin is above Korra or anything like that. And it took all that growth on Tenzin's behalf to get to that point. And that's why I think like kind of lesser appreciated episodes like the Civil Wars two-parter is really good for him. Like that the conversation he has with Iki, I really like that conversation about, you know, the resolution is basically, you know, being part of a family is hard, and that's it. It's not meant to be about Aang's a bad father, takeaways like that. It's no, families are complicated.
Yeah, and I think that's it's like what you said. Like Tenzin's arc definitely seems to be something that most people seem to forget. Like you said, so many people seem to take from this season and the interactions with Tenzin and his siblings was like an insult to Aang's character of him being a bad father, whereas that's really not what is happening. It's that, yeah, there is some levels of favoritism in play. Tenzin himself was not aware of this, and when he does become aware and he kind of understands it, he can also see and learn from that as well, kind of taking the lessons of hearing these stories from his siblings and realizing that what he grew up with is not actually what he grew up with. It's so much different to what he realized. Like, he seems convinced that his siblings were on these journeys with him and his dad across the world, and is so surprised to find out that they were not involved with him in these journeys. So seeing him kind of learn and kind of slowly start realizing that trying to live up to his father's image is what is causing these issues in the sense he's not knowing who he is. He doesn't know how to be this mentor that Korra needs. He doesn't know how to kind of fix the relationship with his siblings and with his children as well, because he's pushing so hard to get to this level that his dad was at, that he feels he needs to be at as well. Like the episode that you mentioned of him trying to get him and Korra into the spirit world, and like he has a go at Milo for banging the gong too much or something like that. He has a go at Kaya, I think, for like the air senses and all these sort of things, and kind of keeps finding things that other people are doing wrong because he doesn't want to admit that he doesn't have this level of skill that his father did have. And like you said, when he has that I am Tenzin moment is when he realizes that trying to push himself up to the level that his father was at is what is causing these problems. He's not himself. He is not doing things the way that he should be doing things. He needs to do it his way. He needs to be Tenzin. And like you said, in all the other seasons that we see after this, he treats Korra as an equal. He has his moments still with like Jinora here and there, because obviously he's still a father. He's like, no, this is my child. Please do not leave. You are my baby. And while there are moments where he does kind of fall back into not always seeing Korra as his equal, like in book 4, where he doesn't believe in her ability to some extent after her injuries, we kind of get this hint of like, you know, not everyone always stay at the like top level of where they've managed to reach with their art. They can kind of fall back here and there. It just shows that after a while, like even he apologizes to Korra when he's like, I'm sorry, I didn't believe in you. And it's things like that. I'm just like, I really do appreciate his arc in book 2, because it leads to those moments later on of his appreciation of others and his own skill at the same time. And even with his family, I feel like he becomes closer to his family after this season because of everything that happened in book 2.
Yeah, because like at the start, like Katara has to like convince him, like take your siblings along with you. He wasn't going to initially, and it starts off kind of not great, but then they're getting on pretty well at the end. And that's the takeaway from Civil Wars, is that yes, there's a little bit of commentary on Aang, but it's them all sort of having a go at each other. Like the Benders team up on Boomy for like, you're the oldest, but you always act like the youngest. They target kind of Kaya a little bit of like, you were off finding yourself for like who knows how long, and then you came back after Aang died, and it's just this interesting point of like, they obviously haven't discussed this in a while. And like all these characters are over 50 years old, and they're bringing up sort of like their kind of childhood issues. And in the same way that like there's a plot where like Janora and Milo have made fun of Iki, they resolved that by literally, they apologize, let's go play. It's like a second resolution between the kids. It's sort of the same thing with the older siblings. There's maybe a little bit more there to it, but it's the same sort of resolution. Like they pull out the family portrait and like, it was a happy family. Were there bad times? Sure, but it was good a lot of the time as well. And the idea that they were just focusing more on the kind of negatives when they've all turned out pretty well. Like Boomy was super high up in the United Forces. Kaya's a like world-renowned healer. It's not that bad. They're allowed to be frustrated by things that happen, but I've never been a big fan of the takeaway being Aang's a bad father. That feels very like lacking in nuance.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. And in the fact that no one actually said the word bad father as well. It's just like the deduction of like their complaints of feeling left out because they weren't airbenders. People assumed, that must mean he was a bad father. And I think it's just interesting just how Tenzin, and particularly the relationship with his siblings as well. Like they kind of seem to have, even though they aren't like Boomy and Kaya aren't like big characters in this season in particular, it feels like they have their own arc in that sense. Like they're both making fun of Tenzin at the start, and obviously Katara is watching and kind of a bit upset about it, which is why she asks Tenzin to take his siblings away with him. But by the end, there is this moment where they're all supporting each other. They're all working together. They all have faith in this, in a sense, with each other, even if they don't believe Boomy's wild stories still. There is something about going from where they were at the start to where they are at the end that shows that they, like speaking about this and kind of learning through their experiences with each other, that they have grown and they've learned how to be better for each other and with each other as well.
Yeah, and rewatching it again, because I rewatched it in the days leading up to this. There's that interesting moment in the Fog of Lost Souls where like Tenzin has the Tenzin moment, but like Boomy's one is about what I guess has to be true of like dealing with cannibals at some point in his life, and then Kaya's one is like actually really interesting, where she basically talks about the idea like, I don't have a family, which I think helps to kind of connect with what Tenzin said about her earlier on, that she was gone, traveling the world, trying to find herself for a while, and wasn't really connected to the family. And just the idea that there's like a little bit more depth to these characters as well. And like Boomy obviously has a pretty clear-cut arc going into book 3, getting airbending. There's the moment in this book where he's talking to the Aang statue, and Kaya comes up to sort of kind of comfort him and like just realize that Aang did care. Like Kaya, who's probably the harshest on Aang, is the one to actually say, he does care about you and always like respected you.
Yeah, and I definitely like how that kind of develops by the end, especially like with Boomy getting that moment, because I think that was the thing that was like the best part of how book 2 starts. Like we've seen this moment with Boomy feeling like he wasn't what Aang wanted, and then the start of the new season is of him finding having this ability to connect with his dad in a deeper way. And I just realized that I forgot about that moment with Kaya, like running away and clearly not feeling like she was part of the family in some sense because of how different she was. But it's definitely like an interesting element of how these siblings connect together and how they were clearly so different and separate from each other in one sense, and how they end up by the end with each other once more. And I really appreciate seeing that, especially considering there is so much sibling dynamic in book 2. Which kind of leads in obviously into the antagonist situation with Unalaq obviously being the brother of Tonraq, Korra's father, and the Vatu situation, because I don't know how, but it seems like we had siblings in the last season as well with book 1 with Amon and oh god, I've forgotten his name.
Tarlock.
Tarlock, that's it. I was going to say Tormor's like, no, that's this season. That's Korra's dad. Tarlock.
Yeah.
Too many T's. Um, but the fact that there's a sibling dynamic with this villain as well, and there's like this familial connection to Korra, I think was the most interesting part of a villain for this season. Because obviously in Avatar we have it's Zuko's father, but Zuko doesn't join our team until like the latter half of book 3, so there's still not really that connective measure with the villain in that sense. Whereas here, it's a family member that is the antagonist, that is the one that is causing these problems for Korra and for the world. I think it was such an interesting take, and then adding in like the super villain aspect of Vaatu as well. And it was just such a really interesting take. So I'd love to hear what you thought of the two villains in this case as well.
Yeah, and it is interesting because like the themes of book 2 are basically like spirituality and family. Like everything is connected to family because like as we just discussed, like Tenzin and his siblings, his own children. Even Mako and Bolin have a little bit of an arc where they're kind of at odds with each other and they kind of go back and forth. It's subtle, but it's an arc. Unalaq and Tonrock, Unalaq and his own kids. There's a bit of an arc there with Eska and Desna and their kind of like devotion to him and how that changes as things go on towards the end. And yeah, I've always appreciated that aspect of Unalaq. That Korra has to deal with a family member being her villain, and that works with the growing to trust him at the start, and especially because he does have like a conflict with her father, and she's at odds with her father at the start. It kind of helps to be like, oh, I'm not getting on well with you, so okay, I'll go with Unalaq because he's respecting me, you're not, and that's why I from the very early episodes of book 2, the Southern Lights is definitely one of my favorite ones because I really like the trip into the Everstorm and that they kind of tease it and then finally come out with the story of what happened in the past, and then they add on to it later with the truth of like Unalaq has manipulated it, but still it gets across that idea of like Tonrock is not particularly spiritual. That sure Unalaq engineered some of this situation, but Tonrock still made the decision to destroy a spirit forest at the end of the day. And he directly says to Korra at one point that the spirits in the physical world should remain separate. That's his view on things. He says that to the Avatar, the bridge between the worlds. And you can see again, like Tenzin, she needed a little bit of separation from her father. And they do a pretty similar thing again, where she has her doubts, they come back together, there's an apology, and they both realize that they were wrong in all of this. But you also do eventually get to the resolution between like Unalaq and Tonrock. They don't focus on it like a ton, but what I like about it is that it's in a book about family. Unalaq, it's like Tonrock has all the reason in the world to really hate his brother for what's happened, but he still reaches out his hand kind of at the end of like, you're a man, you have a family, you know, Korra's your niece, like why are you doing all of this? Like, you're leaving your humanity behind. And Unalaq still goes ahead with it, that there's that loss of like Tonrock focuses on family, Unalaq focuses on spirituality at the cost of everything basically.
And I think that's what's kind of really interesting about Unalaq as a character in that sense, is that his motivations initially are this idea of kind of bringing back particularly the water tribes to their spiritual level that they were in the past. I wouldn't like necessarily compare their spirituality to the same level as like the airbenders and the Air Nation, for example, because they were like, as Korra would describe it, the spirituals. Like they were Mr. and Mrs. Spiritual in terms of like their level of spirituality. But it seems like the water tribes were close enough, especially from what we saw actually in Avatar as well, with the Northern Water Tribe and the oasis that they have and their connection to the moon and ocean spirits.
Yeah.
But it seems, especially in Korra, that things have changed so drastically. And we see that a little bit in the comics as well, in the, I think it's the North and South comics, where it's like the industrialization that is coming to the Southern Water Tribe. It kind of shows a sense of how things can change so quickly when traditions are changed to make things more innovative for a modern age. So I can kind of get where Unalaq is coming from wanting to make sure that spirituality and these spirits and spiritual festivals and understanding of the spirits themselves within the water tribe is so important to him, because if you lose that, then where is history, where is the culture of the water tribe if that's forgotten? and
Mm.
only really remembered for materialistic elements. But then it takes to this further level of not only is he wanting the spirits back, he's wanting the power that comes with it. He wants this power in regards to controlling the spirits in the sense and having that as an advantage for him. I wouldn't necessarily say that when he started it was all about power, but I think as it progresses further and we see him kind of go further towards that, it becomes just about power and having this ultimate power. But what would you say, kind of like in regards to that in relation to Vatu as well?
Yeah, like Unalak's goals, like a lot of the villains, like you see the kind of positive aspects to his sort of ideology at the start, because he has to be the good spiritual teacher at the start. He has to honestly teach Korra to be spiritual because he needs her for his plans. So he actually has to make her spiritual. And so that's why I kind of really like Unalak in those early episodes, especially, like I said, the Southern Lights, because he's giving her all this really valuable advice. Like he says, find the light in the dark, and talks to her about, like, I have faith in you as the avatar, that one day you'll become one of the best avatars, basically. And he says, like, okay, you have to go in there alone, and she's having doubts, but he has faith in her to go in there, and that's unlike anyone else at the time. And it's interesting to see kind of the switch from that, and that, like, as he kind of explains his motivations, because you later find out, like, he's Red Lotus, so he's obviously devoted to Vatu, like they all are. So chaos is his goal, and even in book 2 and 3, it's sort of hard to get behind that idea of, like, just supporting chaos. But from his point of view, the world is already in chaos because the people aren't spiritual. And you see, like, Varric, that's what Varric is meant to represent, like the worst of the southern tribe. He's all about industry, technology. He's not spiritual at all, which is why we have that conflict and why he targets Varric in those early episodes. And that's where I do like that aspect of, like, you see, he just is this really, really spiritual person who wishes the world was more spiritual. That's actually, to me, a really interesting idea for a character, that it's not super grandiose, but it's actually kind of interesting. And in the end, his ideals actually rub off on Korra. And Korra's decision at the end to keep the spirit portals open, I think, is one of the best character moments, like, in the series, both series, I think, because book 4 references the idea that you should learn from your villains. Book 2 is, I think, the clearest example of that, because she's almost told, directed by Tenzin, yeah, just close the portals, we'll go home. But she thinks about it because she's seen what happened in the past. She's heard what Unalak says, and she doesn't agree with all of it, but she's also seen the effect that she's had. She brought back the Southern Lights. There's a visual and, like, physical thing that happened because she was more spiritual, that she can actually, like, change the world for the better going forward, and that the world could do with being a little bit more spiritual, because, like, we get into books where it's much more about technology, and spirit stuff is only being used for weaponry. And even going into, like, the comics and stuff like that, that's still a topic I really want to see explored. That, to me, is, like, Korra's goal as the Avatar, to try and fix the issue between humans and spirits, because she's brought them back. She did the reverse of what Wan did.
Yeah. I think that's definitely what's interesting, like what you mentioned of, like, learning from your villains as well. And I think what Korra's decision does in regards to kind of what she learned from Unalak, and not fully from Vatu, but also kind of a little bit from Vatu, is that the balance in the world has been very clearly out of balance for such a long period of time, that keeping the spirit portals open seems the kind of the best decision to help finding a way to bring the balance back in, because for 10,000 years, obviously, with the spirit portals closed and with one becoming the avatar, things haven't always been, not like perfect, but things haven't always worked out well. There has been continuous conflict. As, like, one's journey, he wasn't able to do everything he needed to make the world at peace, which is why the avatar reincarnates. So having Korra reopen them with this sense of wanting to see, sort of in a way, how the world will be able to cope and how the world will maybe fix and adapt itself for the better, by having the spirit portal open and having this closer connection to the spirits. I think it's something that very clearly is learned from Unalaq, and kind of the message that he wanted to get across of how disconnected the world and the people are from each other, as well as with the spirits, and this connection to nature at the same sense as well. Not like the hippie sense, which like kind of occasionally sounds like, but sort of like Kaya. Like Kaya is someone that is from the water tribe and seems to have more spiritual connection than even Tenzin himself. But that continues in the next few seasons with the spirit portals open as well. She seems to continue to have this connection to this spirituality, recognizing also that Jinora can sense these spirits and is playing with spirits and various other elements as well. So I think how it ends is both the best way for Korra's arc in that season, but I think it's the best message for understanding and showing the importance of villains as well. Like there's I think it's Invincible, you know, that new show where there's like a villain in it who hates the Mount Rushmore, or like the statues on Mount Rushmore, saying they were racist, they were terrible people, we want statues of them. And there's like posts going around, it's like, why are you booing? He's right. I feel that's sort of like what Unalaq is. Like he went way too far, but at the start it's like, yeah, why are we booing? He is right. You need to be more spiritual. Like what he's doing makes sense. It just went too far. And I think Korra recognizes that as well. And obviously the Vaatu situation, very, very different, but he still has a role to play at the same time, especially in regards to the spirit world and the whole history of the Avatar as well.
Yeah, and that's the thing, like getting, I suppose, more the sort of idea of like balance of light and dark. I know a lot of people sort of take issue with that they introduced, two spirits who represent light, one represents dark, and is it a little bit too like on the nose or something like that. I think the way they execute it with regards to like what light means, what an era of light means versus what an era of darkness means, gets it across pretty well. That balance is not 50-50 in this case, because that is allowing half of the world to be this chaotic evil that always seeks to consume everything, whereas 50% light just exists. Like we've been in an era of light in Avatar for the last 10,000 years. Bad stuff is still allowed to happen. Like an era of light is basically like the freedom for stuff to go wrong if that's the way it's going to go, but you tackle it if it rises up, compared to an era of darkness, which is just consume all. And that's the whole point of a lot of the quotes throughout the book of like, find the light in the dark. It's more difficult. It's easier to find the darkness. That's Iroh's quote. If you look for the light, you'll often find it, but if you look for the darkness, it's all you'll ever see. And then Unalaq even has a quote. I think I have it here. Let me get it up. About spirits. It's like, there are no evil spirits. There's light and dark in them all. But when they're unbalanced, the darkness takes over. So creating the idea that an unbalanced spirit is a dark spirit. It's not a 50-50 spirit. So I know a lot of people like that kind of gray idea, like gray Jedi from Star Wars. I don't think it quite fits for Avatar, just because of the way they presented it, and that Vaatu always seeks to, corrupt everything. As we saw, like the second Rava and Vaatu were separated by one, Rava immediately shrunk. She didn't take any damage, but just by being separated, it created an imbalance. And I think that kind of tells the story. But there with those two.
No, definitely. I think that kind of goes a little bit into sort of like the history of the Avatar aspect with it, because it's like you said, that seems to be like varying different complaints and like agreements with the beginnings episodes. Like I know Hello Future Me did a whole video about the critique of the beginnings episodes, which I didn't fully agree with. The video was good, but I didn't fully agree with the points in regards to it, because I feel like you said, that the visuals and the reasonings for Rava and Vaatu's existence and what they represented makes a lot of sense for the world of Avatar. Like Rava herself, and particularly I think maybe, I guess the ending is like the main part where you see this message of why Rava and Vaatu make sense in terms of their representations of the light and dark, is that when Korra is her giant like avatar spirit self when she's fighting like Unavatu. She is at this sort of lowest point for her again. Like she keeps hitting that lowest point, but she doesn't have this belief in herself until, you know, obviously Jinora arrives and things kind of slightly start going a bit more in her direction, that she finally sees Rava again. Rava is the light in the dark inside of Unavatu. I think it's that message in particular that shows why the story of Rava, Vatu, and One really makes sense with this journey of Avatar. Like, there's not always been kind of like a justification, I feel, of the Avatar's existence. Is just kind of there. And even though you don't necessarily need to explain why the Avatar exists, it made sense for this to happen with where this book was going, because everything was out of balance. There was this sense of disconnect from this spiritual side, and just consistently bad things happening, and people just going further into this darkness and not seeing the positive with it. Same as Korra. I feel like Korra was at this point in book 2, especially at the start, who doesn't see the good in anything anymore. She is untrusting. She doesn't recognize or see people as on her side, hence the whole sides discussion that comes up. She is at that point, as Ira was saying, seeing the dark, and that is all she is seeing. It is only when she hears the story of One, and at the end when she's fighting desperately to stay the Avatar and then fighting desperately to save the world as her giant spirit, that she's able to then see the light. So having this backstory, especially for Korra's arc as well, I think was like one of the best decisions of having this backstory of how the Avatar came to be. And it was just it was a really interesting take of as to how it connected to Korra's character as well.
Yeah, because like in beginning she gets to see that like Juan is not this like perfect character, not this like paragon of virtue. He's not like the Avatar in human form at the start. He steals from the Chews, but he's kind at heart because he gives away all of his food to animals and his friends first, and wants to try and make a difference. But he ends up sort of like almost influencing Jaya too much to try and do too much. And it's good because it allows more freedom for the rest of kind of humanity. He shows them the way that you can live outside in the spirit wilds, but you kind of need to, you know, try to live with the spirits because this is the scenario that we're in. But it also, you know, creates a lot of these kind of the more character parts of Beginnings, that like Beginnings is not just lore. The character development between Juan and Rava, I think, is one of the best things there, in that Rava is not exactly what you'd expect at the start from a spirit of light and dark, light and balance, because they're just rolling around like destroying stuff when he finds them, and they don't seem to care what they hit, what they destroy, and both of them are anti-human effectively, based on like what Rava says. And it's only through Juan, you know, kind of devoting himself to fixing his error that she sees that, oh, humanity is capable of like such nobility, that, you know, you are you know, the best of humanity. Like look how hard you try. I'll do everything I can, to the point where like going into that harmonic convergence, he's the one giving her hope, even though she's the spirit of light. And then they reverse that, of course, at the end when Juan dies, having not fulfilled what he wanted, but she's the one who has hope because she can give that to him by starting the cycle. And just that like arc of those two, I think, is really good, because like I'd always thought about like what is the origin of the Avatar, and it always made it very technical, like the spirit is just a spirit, it's not a character. But I like that we get to see that Rava is a character herself. And going forward with Korra, I'd like to see Rava kind of speak a little bit more if we get more content involving Korra, now that she doesn't have the past lives. I think it'd be interesting to see Rava used more as a kind of, you know, an ancient spirit to give advice or something like that, because I actually really like the character. And I've always liked Beginnings. Their Beginnings Part 2 specifically is my favorite episode of Korra, because, you know, I think it does the lore world building really, really well. That, you know, if there was anyone who would have a problem with it, it probably would have been me, because I go so in depth on it. But I don't really have a problem with it. Like there's like one minor retcon there with the Oma and Shu thing, but the Oma and Shu was sort of like almost like built to be retcon because it was literally a legend written on tombs of characters who had already died. And the retcon is basically one word, effectively, that like they became the first earthbenders, and you just have to interpret it more as like earthbending is the power with form rather than just the power itself. And then Avatar itself already sort of like contradicted the idea that the bending animals like gave humans bending, because like Toph explained that she learned earthbending from the badger moles, but we know she had earthbending training when she was young. And then obviously when Aang and Zuko go to the dragons don't like empower them in any way. They just show them a technique, show them a philosophy. And you know, I think it's made really clear with Wan and fire. He's a fire thrower initially. The white dragon teaches him, and he becomes a fire bender. And the hunter, who just knows fire throwing, is like, oh, he's turned it into an extension of himself, and that's what bending is. So it's just a little bit more of a kind of terminology type thing. But otherwise, I don't think like beginnings like contradicts anything. Just because like I never say Avatar was very specific about much of its technical lore, in that like this is the show that has an episode 107, the spirit world, where we never actually see the spirit world. And it's probably one of the most complicated explanations like in the franchise, because it's only explained now because of Janora's technique, that like that weird situation of him like touching Heibai as he phased into the other world separated Aang's spirit from his body, but his spirit's still in the physical world. And it's just like you know, they didn't have it all planned in Avatar, so it's fine that they clarified it in Korra. And it's the same with like the spirits. Like we saw like 5 spirits in Avatar. It's not really a particularly great set of examples, so I don't have any problem with them fully getting into the idea that no, spirits are a whole separate form of being. There are so many different types. So I've never really had a problem with beginnings, and I think they're great episodes.
I completely agree. And I think that the kind of mentioning of what people usually do, of like how it retcons so much stuff about it, I always feel kind of like what you said, that like it doesn't retcon, it expands and kind of actually sorts out some sort of plot holes as well. Like you mentioned about Toph saying she learned from the badger moles and you learn from these animals and stuff. I'm just like, okay, but if you can learn from it, surely that means that Sokka doesn't need to be a non-bender if he could just meet a badger mole and learn earthbending from them, sort of situation.
Yeah, and then Appa's there the whole series. He should be able to teach anyone airbending. Yeah.
Exactly. So things like that. So I feel like it sorts sort of those issues that originally appear in Avatar. I think there are a few things. I think someone mentioned about that the Lost Scrolls mentioned something about how the Avatar spirit is the spirit of Earth, or the planet Earth, or something like that. So that's why the Rava is kind of like a retcon in some sense. I don't fully agree, but I
gets into
just like a shrug it off.
Yeah, that gets into like the canonicity of those sort of like lesser books where like there's no writer involved in the writing of them. They're just a licensed book where they wrote content during ATLA and they just expand on it currently. Like there's the Avatar's Chronicle, the Korra one. That book has the error where it says that avatars going forward past Korra won't be able to communicate with anyone else, which obviously doesn't make any sense. That the next avatar will be able to communicate with Korra, just not with the ones that Korra lost. So it's just this case of like, who wrote that scene in that book? And there's lots of stuff like that. In that, I think one of the things about the line turtles that we know from ATLA is probably not really canon anymore, and that being that the energy bending line turtle from ATLA is apparently the last line turtle, and the other ones were hunted down by humans, which was like, wouldn't we see some giant line turtle corpses all across the world if there were dozens of line turtles? And like, how do humans kill line turtles? Like, they're so giant. Like, I suppose it's possible, but when, how did this happen? There's lots of information like that in the franchise that's all kind of all over the place. Like, there's really cool information on the trading card game, but most people don't consider it canon, even though that's like the only place the Enema genocide is discussed in like any detail. So I think that like Lost Scrolls book is like, if it fits, fit it in. If it doesn't fit, just discard it. there's a lot of stuff like that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think it's things like that, like, I think just in regards to that, and just with beginnings as a whole, I feel like even though it didn't necessarily have to be there, it makes sense for the story that is being told that it is included. It
Mm,
doesn't feel like it's like an exposition dump of the history of the Avatar. It feels integral to the story. If beginnings wasn't there, the story wouldn't make sense in the direction that it's going.
mm,
We could technically argue that maybe the Civil War aspect could have just been the main focus of book two, but I like that there are these two different plot
mm,
lines in regards to it. Of there's the Civil War aspect between the South and the North that is connected. Like, they don't feel disconnected to me. They feel connected as to where one leads into the other of this spiritual aspect, because the spirits are involved in that Civil War at the same time. Like, that is part of why everything is happening, is due to this
yeah,
disconnection to the spirits, which leads into what is happening with Vatu and the beginning story and things like that. It makes sense to have this history of the Avatar and this further exploration of the spirit world at the same time, because of the story that is being told. And I really appreciate seeing more of the spirit world. I feel like Korra gives us more of the spirit world than Avatar did, and
mm,
it's so much more interesting in Legend of Korra. I would say in the books as well, with the Kyoshi books, obviously we're seeing a lot of the spirit world there as well.
yeah,
Uh, Probably not the same level, but enough that it gives this level of how much it has changed as well, depending on where the world is in terms of how it's doing in terms of stuff. Like, we see the spirit world briefly in Aang's time, and it looks like desolate and kind of not like ugly, but it doesn't look like a
yeah,
good place to be. Probably because the physical world is in such turmoil. Then when we're
yeah,
seeing it in Korra's time, there are bits and pieces of the land where it's kind of like it doesn't really know where it is. There are parts where Korra is that it's kind of reflecting how she's feeling and the turmoil she is going through. As Iroh says, like, your emotions dictate what this world looks like. And then we've got Jinora at the same time, where everything looks happy and it looks lovely and beautiful. And I think that was just a really interesting presentation of the spirit world in that sense, and the journey that this book is going on, represented in like a very visual sense.
yeah. And that's the thing. Like ATLA really only showed us like Ko's domain in the spirit world. Like he has conversations with Roku in this generic sort of like cloud area when they first show off the spirit world. Other than that, it's like they show Ko's area in this book two, sorry, in the book one finale, and then Escape
Mm.
from the Spirit World, the web comic shows the exact same sort of locations in general. And so, we only ever saw like a tiny part of the spirit world in Avatar. So I've always liked how they show it here, that it's changeable. There is the whole light dark dynamic, and just that there are animals here, but they're spirit animals, which are different than physical animals, and that's kind of interesting, given that like the most recent book they announced is Beasts of the Four Nations, where they're going to be apparently showing us spirit animals and normal animals. So
Mm.
hopefully we'll learn more about that in that book. But yeah, I've always liked it. Like my icon most places is the carrot spirit, and so we wouldn't have got that spirit in ATLA because they only had like 4 or 5 different spirits, and it's just cool to see as we go through the series all the different types of spirits that they can introduce, and that like in Turf Wars that there's this like rock golem spirit at the start, and that there are these giant ones, there are small ones that look relatively normal, um, and that's the whole point. In the same way that there's different people, different nations, it's the same with the spirit world, and that's kind of what I'm waiting for them to get into as we go forward, is to really dive deep into how is Korra going to attempt to bring peace between these two factions, because right now it doesn't seem like it's necessarily possible, because they seem to be committing to the idea that humans have to be spiritual to make that happen, but then the spirits don't have to change at all to
Mm.
live in the physical world. And even though Rava directly says humans are from the spirit world, the spirits are from the spirit world. So it's a problem in beginnings that spirits have basically taken over the entire world, which creates the importance of the line turtles as like the guardians of balance before the Avatar,
Mm.
which beginnings didn't answer everything. It just switches the question to like origin of the Avatar. And can you tell us about the Line Turtles now? Actually, where did they get the elements from? And where did they all go? As like the only animals really able to communicate, and spirits even call them ancient. Like that creates an extra importance on them. So all of these elements I just like really really like, and they use it in the other stuff. Like even when Korra was airing, a lot of the comics that were released at the time also expanded on the spirit world with regards to like the Rift did some really heavy lore with regards to like Lady Tianhai, and that spirits can choose to become mortal if they want, and vice versa as well with Iroh and the Painted Lady, and there's all of these things like the Mother of Faces introduced as like a spirit having a child that's Ko's mother, and all these interesting kind of concepts are like yeah, they really heavily expanded things in Korra, and I think it's good that they did that.
Mm. No, I definitely agree. And I think that's what makes book 2 in particular incredibly interesting, is that it has so much expansion and development on these things that we only got to see a small peek at in Avatar. And here it's not like it goes like full ham, but it kind of does. Like there is just so much that you are learning in this, and it continues throughout the rest of the seasons. Um, and it's fascinating to see how much develops and changes in this world just from seeing it briefly here and there in book 2, for it to then be discussed further down the line. And hopefully, like you said, more of this happens in the Korra comic books as well, of where the spirit connection between spirits and humans will go, and if there will be any further problems that happens, like we see in Turf Wars a little bit, like a few issues with spirits and their interactions with humans and vice versa. But I love that we saw this kind of development of spirits in the spirit world, and just all these various different things that we see in book 2 as a whole. It just brings up so many things, and I think it's just disappointing that the season itself is just watered down to Aang was a bad father, love triangle, and Korra destroyed the Avatar spirit, which like
Yeah.
none of that's true.
Yeah, like I see that a lot. In that, like, I think one of the most popular videos on my channel is a video where I talk about like I go in depth explaining like why was the past lives lost in this situation, and explaining that whole situation, and then also is there a chance to get them back? And the comments is just filled with a lot of I got the impression very emotional people. Like they're super connected to the idea of the past lives, and that they didn't really care about the technical details of like how it happened and stuff like that. It's just they want them back. And it's like, well, the plot worked then. Like a lot of people complained at the end of book 1 that there was no kind of stakes because Korra was just given her bending back. Well, they took something away here, and people are still complaining. My thoughts on it have always just been that the past lives still exist depending on what avatar we cover. Like when we have Kyoshi, we have the past lives. That was a major plot premise of the Kyoshi novels, was when will she talk to Karuk, and it was fantastic once we got it. So the only real thing we're missing out on is I suppose, Korra specifically getting to talk to specific avatars, and then going forward, we'll still get those other avatars talking to Korra. So I don't think we miss out on as much as we get, especially now that we know we can and will be getting like other series covering different eras and so on. So the past lives are like, they're still there, judging from like a fictional universe point of view.
I completely agree, and I think that's one of the things. Like, I think one of my most controversial things, I haven't done a video on it, but I may do in future, is that for any future thing, even with like the fan made comics and stuff like that in regards to it, but any Avatar shows that may be made for avatars after Korra, the one thing that I don't want to happen is for the past lives to be restored. I don't want any of the past avatars pre Korra to be brought back in that sense, because like you said, it undoes all of those stakes, it undoes all these things that Korra went through and her entire journey, just for fans to kind of be happy again that they're back. Like the past life cycle is still going to continue. They can still speak to like the avatars in the past with whichever avatar you go to. There is going to be a past life to speak to. It's just that people want Aang, basically, in that
Yeah.
regards, which I get, but removing that removes the stakes, like you said, and that's probably one of my most controversial things of like I don't want that to happen.
Mm.
But
Yeah, and then we have Rava. Rava's an ancient spirit. Rava can give some advice if Korra needs to talk to someone. Again, that's just we don't know the specifics on that, but we see Rava speak to Korra enough to where like she should be able to talk to her. And
yeah,
even though she's lost like the energy power of the past lives, I get the impression she still probably like, remembers what happened, and especially like if the Tree of Time works on Rava, she'll get her memories back, and there's a way to like work around it without just completely reversing the decision. Like I know a lot of people like to kind of point out that like, oh well, are all the past lives not in the spirit world? And it's like, oh, that's a very technical kind of thing of like, well, we've never seen two avatar spirits in the spirit world at the same time, so that implies that they're a projection of Rava. So if she doesn't have the ability to do that anymore, they're not there. But when she does project them, it is them, and that's why like when Karuk is speaking to one of the past lives, he's actively hunting for Umi and uh, Ko and stuff like that because he's alive again for just a little moment. So yeah, I do ultimately agree with like I don't really see any way for them to be restored without it just being like a completely new element like introduced, and I don't think they should at least anytime soon. Like I don't want the next Avatar to restore it for sure. They
yeah.
maybe go much further down the line and find a way, maybe, but I don't think we're anywhere near that just yet.
No, I completely agree, and I think it's just it was definitely one of the cool, which is going to sound weird, one of the coolest things I think the Avatar universe did was removing the thing that everyone knew when you think of it. It was like the Avatar is someone who reincarnates and can connect with their past lives, and having those stakes get so high that that's what's lost. It is a devastating moment to feel that much pain for
Yeah,
what's happened is such good writing, and I appreciate it so much. Like all the things that Korra goes through, I think that's the one that made me sympathize with her as a character more than anything, because the Avatar spirit in the Avatar past lives is what was her identity at the same time.
yeah,
So seeing it, it made me sympathize with her more. For others, it was what made them hate her, which I don't get. But like, it's the one thing that I think shows the kind of character that she is. That she's able to kind of keep fighting after that. That she doesn't
yeah.
allow that to kind of take her over at the same time, which just shows how powerful of a character she is.
Yeah, like it's a success that like given the situation she was in, that she was actually able to restore the Avatar like at all. That like we're in an era that like what happened, like it's like 99.9% darkness. Like this is like the worst scenario possible in the entire world, and that's not really over exaggerating the situation because it's the fate of the world that this battle is for. And she came back from it on her own. And Ian Tenzin's advice, it's like it's about who you are, not what you are. And it was the same thing for him, of course. So I've always really liked that aspect of like she solves the issue sort of on her own. Her arc is about like not defining herself by her bending in book one or by being the Avatar in book two. That she's strong on her own, and I like the connection back to Juan as well. That he represented what the Avatar was initially, and then he became the Avatar, and that's why he was sort of effective. And that Juan's decision to close the portals was right at that time, but now it's time to do something different because the criticism of like Juan closing the portals is like humanity needed space at that point, I think. Um, just because everyone else was a danger, like your Juans of the world who can peacefully interact with spirits, fine, but not everyone is like that, and that was the what was needed ultimately.
Mm. No, I completely agree. And I think that's just what makes book two such an interesting season. It's just there's so many incredible things that happen. Um, and yeah, I'm glad to say that I've overcome that sort of anxiety of saying I love book two, because I
Yeah,
love book two. I think it's an incredible season.
yeah,
I would say like the order, if I was going to put things in order, it would be 3, 4, 2, 1, but maybe even putting two above four after this whole discussion that we've had here today as well. Um, and honestly, I really appreciate you coming to speak with me about book two, just having
yeah,
this really in-depth chat about book two and like the incredible things that it does and that it features.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you have time, but for anyone who is in the comment section, if you have any questions of things or anything that you liked about book 2 that you would like us to like respond to, send things in. If no one has anything, then we'll probably end it here. Or if you do have to leave, we can end it here at this point as well.
Yeah, like there is the other smaller arcs with characters like Mako has an arc, Bolin has an arc. But I think Bolin's arc is actually like relatively significant in that they play off the idea like Mako has finally sort of found his path. Being a police officer is something he's like really, really good at. We got a hint of that in book 1 with how he like figured out the equalist posters and stuff like that. So Bolin hasn't. Like he goes back to the pro bending with a different team, doesn't work out. Tries this, doesn't work out, and it's sort of defining of his overall arc, and that they're still doing it in the comics. Like they're still going back and forth about like he wants to do this but not this. So it's going to be interesting to see how that ends up working out for him, because he's one of those powerful benders in the series, being like a lava bender.
Oh yeah.
So it feels weird that the impression I get is like as of the end of Ruins of the Empire, they're maybe setting him up for some sort of like political role that he'll run in the elections when they actually like do them. But I liked his kind of becoming a hero on screen and off screen here, like the Night of a Thousand Stars moment where they have the what he's doing matching up with what's happening on screen. I thought was like really, really well done. That's just a big hero moment for him. And then it coincides with like Mako being proven right, and the whole like Lin not listening to the rookies, which I know is something some fans criticized, that like it's like out of character for Lin to do that, but I'm kind of like, when was that established as part of her character?
Yeah.
It seems pretty in character that she would be a little bit like that, and kind of has to learn from it, that the other characters learn. I get it, she sacrificed herself in book 1. There was some, we really turned the corner as of like episode 6 in book 1 on Lin, but it doesn't mean she's like perfect. So I actually liked Mako's arc, because he kind of had a similar thing in book 1 where like he was like kind of correct about something and kind of stood his ground, and the same thing happens here. Mako's arc gets very mixed up in the romance, of course. Bolin's is also messed up in romance as well, in a different way, which I don't mind as much, but I like where they go with like Opal in book 3 rather than like sticking with Eska or Ginger.
Yeah, I'm glad they didn't have that happen, because that wasn't the best decision. But I definitely agree with you about both Bolin and Mako's arc. I think Bolin's one is one that I think it's not recognized at all. Like people seem to think that Bolin in the season basically didn't need to exist in it. And while I can kind of like half see where they may be coming from with that, he is still integral to the story. Like his involvement with Asami helps her get this interaction with Varric. His involvement with Varric is what leads to this uncovering of the plot that he has going on. His involvement with the movers, just showing how propaganda is working, and how the North is kind of, even though the North is in the wrong, how the North is continued to be vilified, and him kind of not recognizing that, but also the sense of him having the ability to have his own identity at the same time outside of his brother, after kind of being abandoned by Mako for Mako joining the police force, and him trying to still be a pro bender but not really having anyone to support him doing that. And then obviously with Mako as well, like his journey of trying, like fighting for what's right, but occasionally not going about it in the right way, like resorting to going to criminals for help. Not the best decisions, just like very not big brain thinking sort of situation, but you can kind of see where he's coming from. Like he's desperate to make sure that everyone is safe in that regard, and trying to, because he knows that he's right, he's got the evidence, but not enough to prove that he is. And I think that just shows like the level of what his character is. Like he's someone who will fight for the right thing. And even Asami has like her own little arc as well. It's very small because she doesn't have like the biggest role in this season, except for kind of like a little bit earlier in the Civil War element. But she does have her own one of kind of recognizing, in a sense, kind of the role that she has to play in this, and kind of going about it in the wrong way as well, of like relying a little bit on war racketeering, a little bit with selling products to help the South. But there are so many things that happen with these characters that I feel it's just kind of overlooked when critiques for this season comes in. Like, so many people say, oh, Asami doesn't really need to exist in this season, Bolin's a dumb character, Mako sucks, Korra is an asshole. Like, that's what it ends up boiling down to. And I'm like, but that's just not looking at it in the right way. It's just kind of taking it at face value and not really actually looking into it. Just being like, one character trait has appeared. That's the only trait that they have.
Yeah, like Asami's arc is kind of interesting in that, like, it does get dropped a little bit, in that the second, like, she sort of quote unquote gets back together with Mako, she doesn't really appear all that much, and they never actually like resolve properly the Mako Asami relationship. It's just sort of like implied they break up, or like that it never actually happened. And there's a few things like that with Asami where, like, I think she's definitely the main character that the writers kind of struggled with the most to like know what exactly they want to do with her. Even in the comics right now, when she is much more of a main character, being, you know, in the relationship with Korra, they still don't really know a lot of times what to do with her. And I am waiting for like a bigger arc, because I always say with Asami, like, I think like 107, the aftermath, like that's her best episode, like her decision to choose her friends over her father. But they didn't really have a lot after that until you get to book 4, and it's the reverse of that, of like reunion with her father. So I definitely want to see more of that. Whereas like Mako just sort of, they don't use him as much in book 3 and 4 outside of like fights, but I think there's like set up for like a pretty decent moment, and that I'm guessing like he'll be the next chief of police, I guess, and that'll be like a pretty cool moment whenever that happens, because Lin pretty much goes like 180 on Mako, from just being the rookie to being like right hand man. So I kind of appreciate that from like Lin's perspective going forward. But yeah, like the smaller arcs, like Asami actually has something going on here, whereas like book 3 Asami is just like with the group. She's there, she's in a lot of scenes, but like there's no arc for her as such. At least here there was the business arc.
Yeah, I think the one thing about Asami's arc that we do kind of see like a sort of arc is that she is the compassionate. She's sort of like the mixture of like Katara and Sokka in one character, if you were to kind of have a comparison with Avatar, in that she is the intellectual of the group. She is the one of like, the team don't have many brain cells. The only brain cells they have are with Asami sort of situation. But she has that compassionate side of Katara. She's the one that is consistently kind of looking out for the group. She's the sort of protector, even being the non-bender, she's sort of the protector. But I do agree that they do seem to struggle a little bit with her character here and there. And I think similarly with Bolin as well, they seem to kind of not fully know where to go with their characters. But in terms of book 2, I definitely think they have like a bit more of like a role in this season that kind of makes sense. But I've just seen someone's comment here, which I think is just one that kind of makes sense, is simply put, book 2 needed more episodes to explore the plot better, and Asami needed more screen time. And I think I can kind of agree with that, especially in terms of just the more episodes, because it did feel a bit...
I think that's Korra in general. That's every book of Korra.
Oh yeah, that's literally every Korra. Like book 1, book 2, 3 and 4, and a bigger budget. Because wasn't it book 2 at the start, they had like a cut in the budget, so they had to use like a not the best production team, so the animation seems a bit less crisp.
I don't think it's a budget reason. It was just a scheduling thing where Studio Mir, who's the main animation studio, chose to do, I think, Boondocks, which is less animation rather than doing Korra book 2. So that sort of forced the hand where they had to go to an anime studio kind of last minute. And I think helps to explain why there's like a 15-month break between book 1 and 2 in terms of when they aired, is because there was production kind of issues getting the new animation studio on board. And then I think Studio Mir realized that like Korra is actually the show will be remembered for. We need to come back on board and not like let another studio kind of ruin our legacy or whatever. And that's why you have that situation where like episode 1 to 6 is done by Studio Pierrot. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. beginnings is done by Mur, and then 9 is the last episode that Piero do.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. But yeah, I just remember thinking that, just like that was the one thing. It was just like, oh, it'd be really great if they had more episodes, but of course they had a more consistent
Yeah.
sort of production animation as
Yeah.
well. But that's
And I don't
definitely
even
where
mind
I
the
come
animation
for.
in early book 2. I
Oh, yeah.
rewatching it, like I think it's fine. There's a lot of really good moments. Like there's a nice sort of hand to hand combat scene in Civil Wars Part 1 where Korra takes down all of the southern rebels without
Oh,
using her
yeah.
bending, and she
Yeah,
like
yeah,
uses like fabric to wrap them up and stuff like that. So there's good
yeah.
moments. Like everyone always with animation highlights like a non-keyframe moment where the character looks weird as like this is why the animation's bad. But then you realize that like there's like 3 animation studios that work on Avatar, and the quality and animation style changes between them, and even Studio Mir, who's like the best studio, they have stuff like what is it, Six Finger Lin, and in certain scenes and stuff like that.
Yeah. And one where it's I think the funniest one I think is like in season 3 where Asami is getting off the back of a flying bison, and she's just kind of frozen, just kind of like laying down with her arms kind of like in a really weird position for like a good long while, and then suddenly reappears. I just always find things like that hilarious. But yeah, there's definitely things like that. But I think it was definitely much like a whole Korra sort of quote unquote issue of not as many episodes, not always the biggest budget and stuff like that. But that's just unfortunately the Legend of Korra issue of
Yeah.
Nickelodeon not knowing how good they had it with Korra.
Yeah, and like all the ideas are great. Like there's so much potential in like every single book. Like if they'd given us more characterization in book 3 on the Red Lotus members, explained the Red Lotus a little bit more, they're like 4 really interesting characters, but we learn very little about them. There's a simple way to do that. Like book 4, Kuvira, I think they really miss out on developing a lot of the kind of uh, supporting plots with regards to like the relationship with Batar, where that came from, the idea that if you don't read the comics and don't pay too much attention, you almost forget that wait, like Kavir is meant to be seen as like adopted daughter, and like it doesn't really feel like that ever in the book, even though it's meant to be like mother and daughter come to blows effectively over politics, but it's very subtly done and they don't focus on
Yeah.
it too much. Um, book 1, I actually think book 1's pretty solid in that like the only thing I'd really add in is just like right at the end, like an explanation of Amon's how he takes away bending technique, which they had explained in interviews afterwards. And I don't get why they couldn't have just had like Katara explain, well, this is what's wrong with you. I can't reverse it because I can't do blood bending to that level. Um, and maybe like how Amon and Hiroshi met is something like that would have been nice to know. And then in book 2, it's like how did Unalaq first meet Vatu? But again, that's more of a Red Lotus backstory thing. Like
Yeah.
just cover that. And then the big fight, the kidnapping attempt on Korra, like what a tease.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. I think with things like that, like if they had like if each season had like even an extra episode, I think all
Yeah.
those things would have had that opportunity to kind of be explored, as well as the fact that if all 4 seasons had kind of been ordered at once, I think it would have also been maybe possibly a little bit more coherent in some areas. But even without all of them being ordered, I feel like the
Yeah.
stories match up well enough, especially for 2, 3, and 4. But even kind of like 1 to 2, I feel like Korra's arc from 1 to 2 makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense with everything that we've seen. And book 2
Yeah.
just kind of expands on the things that we've seen in book 1. Like some things feel occasionally disjointed, but even then, like it's only if you're kind of aware of it that maybe you'll notice it. It's not
Yeah.
really kind of like a big thing. I just kind
Mm.
of appreciate them all, and especially book 2. I think considering book 2 kind of was like rushed out really quickly in a sense, like they had to come up with the story really quickly, it had to be animated really quickly because it was suddenly ordered, and they had to do it in like under a year, I think it was, or something like that, because it was I think like book 1 had finished airing like in December sort of time the previous year, and then book 2 aired the summer of the year after, or something like that. So it was really not that long a period of time of kind of getting that sorted. But considering all of those sort of things, like book 2 is great how it is. Like, I don't think there's anything that I would really change about it.
Yeah, like I think there's a few comments about this, but like the idea that, like, should the Civil War's plot have been like expanded out more or not? My thing on that is always that, like, we have a comic called North and South, and it also doesn't like fully go in on North versus South as well, even though it nearly did. This also doesn't, and I think it's fine here, just because like Unalaq doesn't really care about the politics. He's just like, he does what he does to protect the portals because of his spirit plan. And then the net result is that because the leader of both tribes die, they use that as like the way to transition into like Southern independence. I think we have to just wait until they ever decide to tell us the proper like origin story of how the South like formed from the North, which is obviously because of like cultural like differences and like the restrictions that we know about from ATLA, but the specifics, like, we don't really know outside of just very general, like, well, the South formed from the North, and then the Foggy Swamp tribe formed from that again. So it's not like, I never criticize book 2 for not doing that, in the same way that, like, I never criticize like Runes of the Empire for like trying to expand on book 4, when a lot of the problems are ultimately like book 4 didn't do it, not the comic, sort of thing.
No, I completely agree. And I think there's just something about it, like, there is still the opportunity for, if those things want to be expanded on, there is the opportunity for that to happen in the comics in some form. So it's not like anything that has been quote unquote missed can't be discussed at some point. I think that's just kind of what I'm glad that the comic books are still things that are coming out, because you keep learning new things with each different graphic novel series that's coming out. Like, in Balance, we've learned a bit more about the creation of Republic City, for example. North and South, we've learned about how the South got to be so big and like important as it is in Legend of Korra, and things like that. So it'll be interesting to see if more exploration of the Water Tribes is seen in the future Korra, and maybe even the Avatar graphic novels.
Yeah, if they ever get back to telling sort of like important comics.
That's true. But yeah, I guess kind of like to finalize these sort of things, I'm just seeing kind of like a few other stuff here. I think a lot of the lack of depth issues in Legend of Korra can hopefully be addressed with the comic. Yeah, so basically kind of what we're saying, or with Avatar Studios as well. Oh, someone's just mentioned here as well, I wonder how many episodes Avatar Studios will have. I feel like they will have less than Korra. That does seem to be kind of the thing that most things are happening now. Like, more TV series are having like less episodes a season, it seems.
Yeah, it depends on what they do, because like they said they're going to do like mini series, full series, movies. So
Yeah.
like we're going to get a variety of different things. And then like if they only do small stories, they can tell it in like 5-6 episodes if they keep the kind of magnitude of them kind of small.
Yeah, that's true enough. I've just this question is just one relating to Unlock. What were Unlock's exact motives? But why did Unlock team up with Vaatu, the spirit of darkness, when he himself said, "Find the light in the dark"? So why did he embrace darkness himself? That is a good question.
Yeah, well, the second part is obviously like when he said "find the light in the dark," he was helping Korra to actually become spiritual. So he was sort of like not revealing his full motivations. She needed to find the light in the dark to unlock the portal, because he can't do that. He needs her as the avatar to do that. His exact motivations, well, it's obviously the Red Lotus motivation is that they support Vaatu, because they're like the counterpoint to the White Lotus, which supports the Avatar and Rava. And then, yeah, he just supports spirits so much that he, like as part of how Vaatu sort of gains power, he corrupts the spirits. So the more spirits there are, more in control of like the physical world, the more Vaatu's in control. And Unalaq ultimately supports spirits more than he supports humans, because like Desna nearly died and he didn't care, and he was willing to become part of, Vaatu, which, obviously there's a little bit of a discussion there about like, did he know he would just become part of like this monster that Vaatu would completely take over or not? I get the impression he thought it would be more of a actual Avatar situation, but didn't quite expect Vaatu to just like
take over.
consume him, basically.
Yeah. I think someone kind of talks about that a little bit here. It's like Unlock was devoted to the spirits, so it kind of didn't matter whether it was light or dark. It was a fact in the sense that Vaatu was the one who wanted to open the portals. And I kind of like that. Like, Vaatu seemed to be the one who was more on the side of spirits than Rava. Like, Rava seemed to kind of be like split down the middle, especially after her interactions with One.
Yeah.
So it just kind of makes sense that Unlock would take sides with Vaatu, the person who is only for spirits, really, than humans.
Yeah, and there's the quote I said earlier on as well, that Unalaq says, there are no evil spirits, there's light and dark in them all. So he doesn't care if they're light, if they're dark. He views spirits as being spirits, which is an interesting kind of perspective from someone who, understands that in a way where, like, he developed a technique to actually turn them one way or the other.
Yeah, and I think there was another one here. It's like he did destroy Rava. I think in that sense, like the fact that Rava was one of those spirits who was split down the middle, who supported spirits and humans, but seemed to kind of support humans more in the fact that she joined with a human. So I guess that's in that sense, he's seen her as not a full spirit because she chose a side and in his mind chose the wrong one.
Yeah, and then the other side of Unalaq's motivations are, of course, like, it's a little bit more subtle, but the idea that I think Korra at one point makes a comment that, like, it must have really hurt you when you found out that your brother had the avatar for a daughter, and as part of the Red Lotus plan, which was Unalaq's plan, they wanted to kidnap Korra, and as Zahir explains, train her under the Red Lotus, so like that she would have had the Red Lotus villains as her like masters, and would have been the light avatar, but with dark kind of philosophies, basically. And then as part of what we get here is that Unalaq kind of has Korra on his side, but then there comes a point where he's never going to be able to turn her over to that philosophy, which is where he switches things up. I think Zahir says it. It was never part of the plan. The dark avatar thing was never part of the plan. That was his sort of counterpoint to, like, well, I can't get the avatar to stop fighting Vaatu, so let's bring Vaatu up to that power level, because merged human and spirit is more powerful. So there's a few extra kind of like nuances as well to it.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's just so interesting. I think this is the thing about like book 2 and just like Legend of Korra and Avatar is like there are so many things that you can explore about this series. Like there is like a never-ending supply of ways of thinking about it. I think kind of with that, we'll finish up here. I've just realized how long we've been doing this live, and it's but there's a lot of fun stuff, and it's been great to speak with someone in depth about book 2 and sort of things that it offers to the series and to the Avatar universe. And I hope everyone who is watching has appreciated this conversation and has kind of found new things to appreciate about book 2. I've realized that at this point, literally at the end, my camera has decided to sort itself out, so I look good now. Literally in like the last half hour, I'm like, great. For an entire hour, I looked unhuman with the digital pixelization, but now it works. But Morgan, thank you so much for speaking with me about this. It has been an absolute pleasure talking about and talking positively, specifically about Legend of Korra Book 2.
Yeah, no problem. I always like talking about just Avatar in general, especially Korra Book 2, just because like I am kind of like the lore guy in the fandom, and this is where like it basically all comes from. So there's a lot of detailed stuff to talk about with this book in particular.
Definitely. And for everyone watching, if you want to check out Morgan's channel for all things Avatar and various other fandoms as well, I know you discuss the content of, the link for his channel is in the description box. So head on over, click subscribe, notification bell, all of that good stuff. And obviously for me, if you aren't subscribed to my channel, hit the subscribe button as well. And yeah, this has been a lot of fun, and I hope when this airs after the live, people will enjoy this hour and a half's worth of conversation of book 2 positivity.
Yeah.
But yeah, so for everyone watching, thank you so much for tuning in, and Morgan, thank you again for joining me for this has been a lot of fun. I will end the live here for everyone, so have a great rest of your day, folks. Bye.
Bye.